Welcome to my Midnight Horror channel. If you love listening to creepy Reddit stories or watching horror movies, you're in the right place. Find a cozy spot and get ready for today's spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos. Let's dive in. Story 1. She fell asleep. That was all the opportunity we needed to break the Saturday morning cartoon rule. Disney and Looney Tunes were allowed, but G.I. Joe, Transformers, Smurfs, He-Man, and other shows were off limits. The most forbidden of all was the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon from 1982 to 1985. It featured kids trapped in the fantastical world of D&D. That's about all I remember. I recently checked Wikipedia, and apparently it was quite violent. The National Coalition on Television Violence even pressured the FTC to add a warning claiming that D&D caused violent deaths. Their request was denied for lack of evidence. Nonetheless, my parents believed that Tolkien and even Smurf hats harbored evil, banning everything. This ban only fueled our curiosity. Ironically, if it had been ignored, we might not have cared about the D&D cartoon. Looney Tunes got boring after half an hour. He ignored me, grabbed a steak knife from the kitchen, and opened the basement door, lifting the handle to stop the hinges from whining. My 9-year-old brother went down the steps, intent on defending his family. The minute or so of total silence felt excruciatingly long. John returned without ceremony, put the knife away, and came back to the living room. "What happened?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. There's nobody down there. Must be some weird prank." "But that was our basement," I countered. He shrugged. "Maybe, but probably not. A lot of basements look the same, Pete." Mom started to wake up. Our baby brother Matthew fell asleep on Mom. She was out on the couch before the coyote got clobbered. John, my older brother by 3 years, looked at me before sneaking to the TV. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Don't," I added as he turned the dial. "We'll get in trouble." "Shut up, Pete," he whispered. He crouched and watched the screen. I joined him on the floor. For the first time, we watched beyond the opening of the show. I remember kids turning into wizards and warriors after a roller coaster ride. There was a kid in a barbarian costume with a club. I couldn't focus on the episode. I was scared. Our parents said this cartoon was evil and could hurt us. At some point, I reached to change the channel. John grabbed my wrist and squeezed until it hurt. I could have woken Mom, screamed, or hit my brother. Instead, I rubbed my wrist and kept watching. Then the shot cut to a dark, cluttered room. We recognized it as our unfinished basement. "That's my pennant," John said, pointing at a yellow felt triangle. It had been kept in a box Dad intended to restore, but we knew it would rot down there. We joked about it. "Why is it on TV?" I asked. John looked afraid. "I don't." A man walked into the shot, his back to the camera. He was tall, wearing a dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and had wavy blonde hair like Bo from Dukes of Hazzard. He seemed to search for something but quickly turned, his face close to the camera. Both John and I flinched. "Who do we have here?" He breathed into what sounded like a microphone touching his mustached lips. His face moved up and down, sometimes only an eye or mouth in the frame. John's eyes darted between the TV and our basement door. I was shaking. The man grasped the camera and stepped back, revealing his entire face. He looked like an actor with a practiced smile. I will never forget that face for its incongruity. The genuine mirth in his lips contrasted starkly with his soulless blue eyes. A familiar creak came from the last basement stair. John covered my mouth as I began to yelp. The strange ordeal on the screen ended. D&D resumed. Stunned, we watched for a few more seconds before John switched back to Looney Tunes. He crossed his lips for me to be quiet and crept to the basement door. "No, John, no," I whispered. "But the pennant," I said. He ignored me. The rest of the day went by like any other Saturday. We played outside with the neighborhood kids. John and I didn't talk about the weird commercial. We certainly didn't mention breaking the cartoon ban. But I felt bad. Worse, I felt damned, like I was for sure going to hell. For weeks, I prayed for forgiveness and became more anxious about dying. I was 6 years old. The fear never really went away, but I could sleep and play as the memory of the ordeal faded. The terror returned the night we found John sleepwalking. We shared a bunk bed. I always chose the top, feeling safer with my older brother between me and whatever monsters might come. I never suspected him of being the monster. I recoiled into a ball when a face appeared above the rail of my bunk. It was John, but his eyes were nearly shut, and he was muttering gibberish. He left our bedroom and turned on the hallway light before heading downstairs. Both Mom and Dad were in their doorway by the time I got there. It had been difficult to get out of bed. John's strange behavior I immediately connected to our transgression. "What's going on, Pete?" Dad asked gently. I think he knew I was afraid. "John's acting funny," I said. He went downstairs. After exchanging apprehensive looks, my parents went to find John. They didn't know I followed closely behind, or that I was terrified this had everything to do with D&D and the man with the mustache on the commercial. We found John sitting on the floor, his nose close to the black TV screen. None of the lights were on. Shadows filled his eye sockets. I clutched Mom's housecoat belt. She nearly leaped out of her skin and gave me a stern look before pulling me under her arm. "John?" my dad asked. My brother slowly turned his head. His eyes were shut. "The man with the mustache on the commercial," he droned before lifting his hand to point at the basement door. Almost at the same moment, a high-pitched scream came from below, neither male nor female. That level of anguish is genderless. My dad put himself between us and the basement door. John's eyes snapped open. Mom pulled him close and kept me firmly entwined in her left arm. Dad went to the kitchen for his weapon of choice, the trusty black slugger behind the fridge. He had its twin upstairs beside his bed. "Go upstairs. Bring Matthew to our room. Stay together. Lock the door. I'll call the police." Mom pulled us so fast it felt like I flew. Matthew stayed asleep while John and I stood guard inside with her. As the oldest, it was John's right to claim the bat. If he fell, it was my responsibility to take it up and avenge him. It didn't seem long before Dad knocked at the door. "It's me. Open up. Everything's fine." John nodded for me to open the door. Dad could be under threat, so I would open it, and John would leap to his rescue if needed. Fortunately, it was not. Yet we could see Dad's fear as plainly as the sweat on his skin. His smile took effort. "Nothing in the basement." "Did the police come?" Mom asked. "Go to bed, boys," he said. "Everything's fine. It was nothing." Neither of us believed him. We'd all heard that scream. But we obediently went to our bunks with no intention of sleeping. Our house was so small. Nothing spoken remained a secret. I don't think my parents knew how loud they really were. I'll strip the extraneous from their overheard conversation. The key takeaway came from Dad. "I didn't call the police." "Why?" "Because we need a priest." He said priest, but he meant pastor. Pentecostals don't have priests, just pastors in regular clothes. The next evening, we were sent to our rooms after supper. We didn't argue. We knew the guest coming was a pastor from the church. Not the senior pastor, but the other guy, a junior, I guess. With the sun still up and our nerves on edge, John and I listened for the pastor's arrival. Our parents admitted him, offered him coffee, which he politely declined, and led him to the basement. I recognized every noise and every stare. They must have been down there for less than a minute before we heard a rush of footsteps to the kitchen. "I'm afraid," the pastor said shakily. "This is quite serious." "Do you think it's—" "Do not name it," the pastor warned. He laughed nervously after. "Sorry, I need to call Pastor Shepherd. I know they sent me, but I have to tell you, this is, my first time, and, He trailed off incoherently. Our parents came upstairs later with a box of Tim Hortons donuts and milk. It wasn't a bribe, but it certainly didn't hurt their chances of us following their instructions. Tim Hortons in the 80s was top-notch. They actually made their donuts at the store in those days, and they were huge. I felt guilty for enjoying them. If only we hadn't switched the channel. "The pastor has some work to do," Dad said, "and he will be here through the night. Pray for him and don't leave your room no matter what, okay?" We agreed. He called us good boys and left. I looked at John. He knew I wanted to tell them what we'd done, but he crossed his lips again. Another loud, wordless exchange from my parents' room later that night. We should have told him. Not without getting into the whole D&D argument. That's just... The sudden burst of the front door opening cut them off. We heard the frantic sounds of the pastor grabbing his bag. He sped down the hall to the basement. "Pastor, wait!" Dad called. "No, I have to go. I have to get help." And he left. The next morning, the senior pastor and 3 other men arrived, all with a quiet solemnity. They gathered in our living room, holding hands. I think they took turns praying. Dad stayed home from work that day. He looked tired, holding our baby brother who seemed to not care about any of this. Mom forced us to stay in the yard after breakfast. They had work to do, and we weren't to interrupt. If we did, well, I think we feared that more than not. The baby-faced junior pastor said he couldn't name it, and we didn't want to know the name. Dad took Matthew to his room and stayed there while Mom cleaned the house. John and I sat on the porch step. I took my turn to sneak glances inside while he covered me. In those days, our house had only 1 bathroom, so the basement door was constantly in view. I think John was hoping the action would be more exciting, like some of the cartoons we watched. But I had never been more grateful for the boring normality of a clean house and a family behaving as if they could keep things safe. My life has been full of mundane disappointments. My childhood fantasy book collection is boxed up in my parents' garage. There's no point. I grew up to be just another guy who doesn't fit in with the world he reads about in books. But not today. Today, I understand what was in the basement, and I have reason to fear that name and where it might still be. I looked at the piece of paper John gave me last night, wrapped around a brass key. The note was scrawled hastily, a warning that pulled me from sleep to worry. You know where. Get it. Burn it. I took my turn in the bathroom, stalling to summon the courage to do the unthinkable. That evil from our past was likely still down there. It had never left. It had simply gone dormant, and now it woke. I had a job to do. Slipping the key into my pocket, I gripped the bat. Its weight was familiar, comforting. If I were to fail, at least I'd be armed. The basement stairs creaked as I descended. Same noise of dread from years ago. But it was no longer childhood monsters I feared. I went to face the evil that had always been there, hidden in the dark. The basement door opened with a groan. I braced myself for what I might find. The darkness swallowed me. I was ready for it. I clicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. Dust motes floated like specters in the light. My heart pounded in my ears, and every step felt like it echoed through time. Back to that Saturday morning when we first saw the man with the mustache. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight over the cluttered basement. Shadows danced on the walls, and the familiar old boxes and forgotten toys looked like relics from another life. I knew what I was looking for. The box that contained John's pennant. If it held the key to whatever cursed our home, then it had to be destroyed. The flashlight found it, tucked away in a corner, buried under years of neglect. I approached it cautiously, bat ready in my other hand. As I knelt to open the box, a low guttural growl reverberated through the basement. The air grew colder, and I felt a malevolent presence watching me. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, the yellow pennant lay there, undisturbed. But something else caught my eye, a small leather-bound book. I hesitated, then picked it up. The cover was plain, but when I opened it, the pages were filled with strange symbols and runes. This was it. This was what had drawn the man with the mustache to us. This book was the source of our torment. The growl grew louder, more insistent. I knew I had to act quickly. I placed the book on the ground, poured lighter fluid over it, and struck a match. The flames leapt up, hungrily consuming the pages. The growl turned into a howl of rage, and the temperature in the basement plummeted. I held my ground, bat ready, as the fire burned brighter. The shadows writhed and twisted, and for a moment I thought I saw the man with the mustache, his soulless blue eyes glaring at me through the flames. But then, with a final, ear-piercing shriek, he was gone. The fire died down, leaving only ashes. The oppressive weight lifted from the air and the basement felt like just a basement again. I took a deep breath, relief flooding through me. It was over. I climbed the stairs, locking the basement door behind me. John was waiting in the living room, his face pale but resolute. He didn't need to ask. He knew it was done. We spent the rest of the night in silence, the weight of what had happened settling over us. As dawn broke, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since that fateful day. The man with the mustache was gone, and our home was safe. If you enjoyed the stories, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with fellow horror enthusiasts. Your support helps us bring more terrifying tales to life. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss out on our next creepy adventure. Until next time, stay spooky and keep the lights on. You never know what's lurking in the shadows. Thanks you all.